Because of the technology that they've grown up with, they have an ability to learn at a rate that is absolutely inconceivable to older generations. Use that to your advantage.
Play along, play the game for a while, and then earn it.
Yeah.
Earn your ability to have some flexibility. That's a big takeaway.
There's a lot of areas that I think they're right in many, many ways. But again, we got to figure out how to change the world together.
Welcome to Career EQ, a resource for aspiring young professionals navigating the job search process and the early part of their careers. Your host is John Quinn, Senior Lecturer of Marketing at the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University.
Today at Career Q, our topic du jour is a very timely and possibly even a touchy one. We're going to talk about Gen Z in the workplace. Now, I interact with thousands of Gen Zers every semester, and I'm even the father of 3 of them. I've also read several books about Gen Z, of which are listed in our webpage notes, that were New York Times bestsellers. But I am not an expert on Gen Z. However, our guest today, Marcie Merriman of EY, is. Welcome to Career Q, Marcie.
Thrilled to be here. Marcie Merriman, and I'm currently a managing director at Ernst & Young, where I lead our Cultural Insights customer strategy practice. So my focus there is on generational and societal change. So really understanding how generations are impacting the world, how they're impacting the business world, how they're changing consumer behavior, employee behavior, understanding these aspects of things, and then helping businesses, including our own, get ahead of the curve. So understand how they're changing consumer behavior, how they're changing workplaces, what the business impact is of all of this.
That's interesting stuff. I would have loved to find like a niche in my career like that, because I'm the type of person, like back in the day when we had hardcover magazines, in my free time hanging out by the pool in the summer, I'd be reading American Demographics. Yeah. So really interesting stuff. So thank you for joining us here at Career EQ. So we were talking about the cultural and societal changes. What drew you to Gen Z specifically? And how did you become widely regarded as an expert in the latest generation to enter the working world?
Well, what drew me to them was seeing a real change in millennials. So I've always focused on youth as a way of understanding societal change. So it's not so much that we got to, understand these young people and cater to them or that sort of thing, because that's not what we're bringing to businesses. Instead, I focused on the younger people. So, say teens, early 20s, as a way of understanding what's happening in our broader society. So if I look at Gen Z, which today we put 18 to 28, and compare them to 18 to 28-year-olds 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. By looking at that age span and comparing to past groups at the similar age, we can see things that are true societal change and not just life stage and growing into other things. And for businesses, it can bring a huge competitive advantage. Because if you can see where things are going next, if you can understand what's actually changing within society, looking at things as not, it's the difference between weather of the day and climate change. I'm looking for climate change. I'm not looking for trends. I'm not looking at what color Gen Z wants to wear today or millennials wanted to wear, but instead, what do we see as the real shifts? Yeah. And
so not the Pantone color of the year.
Not the Pantone color. I mean, it has its place in fashion and other things, but that's not where I'm focused. And where I really started digging into Gen Z was, I'd say about 2015, when I thought I was doing research on millennials and looking at what, where they were bringing things and what they wanted next. And I started to see a difference, and I still thought of them as young millennials. And as time went on and data came in, we could see more and more that this wasn't just an extension of millennials. This was a new generation in itself. And I think that's something really important to, convey about how I and my organization focus on generations. It's not pop culture. It's not the headlines that you read every day. Those things honestly really drive me crazy. It really is looking at it from a social science standpoint and true generational theory and to understand how things are flipping, how they're changing. And with that, you're looking at the societal events that impact how you think the world should work. And with Gen Z, think about the amount of change they've been through. So we're putting them as born 1997 to 2007. So the oldest of them was 2. when the Columbine massacre happened. They had just started kindergarten just before 9/11. They had witnessed the collapse of global financial markets while they were in grade school.
Possibly saw their parents laid off.
Yeah, and absolutely saw their parents lose houses, these other things. So even if they were young, they experienced that collapse and the impact of it. And it goes on and on and on what they've experienced. And with that, with this degree of change, and the technologies come along on top of it, there's no way that an 18-year-old today is going to behave the same way as an 18-year-old 20 years ago. There's just no way.
Yeah.
It's truly a different generation. And that's where, when we look at what comes next with Gen Alpha, we can't really say when they start. Right now I'm putting Gen Z's youngest at 18. They could go younger, but my belief is because of the amount of change we've been through in the last 5 years, 10 years, 5 years certainly, the new technologies, COVID, all these things have created way too much change for the generation coming up now, even just behind Gen Z, to be the same generation. So I really do believe the 17-year-olds and below are going to reflect different standards, beliefs, attitudes than even what we're seeing in Gen Z.
Well, I hadn't really thought about that, but Gen Alpha were a very formative stage of their life when COVID hit. So it's going to have a huge impact on who they are as a generation.
Absolutely.
So something you mentioned there, talking about cultural influences and the experiences of Gen Z kind of leads into my first question is like, Gen Z is somewhat stereotyped about their preference for work-life balance, right? And desire for working hybrid or even maybe 100% remote work arrangements. How realistic is that going to be for Gen Z going forward?
Yeah. It's such a struggle because in many ways they're right. And thinking, why should I be in an office? Why should we do these things? And that's where, most of the time I'm advising and, talking with people that are Gen Xers or older millennials as business leaders. So I'm helping them understand Gen Z and themselves relative to Gen Z. And in this case, we're flipping it, right? So we're talking to more of the Gen Z group and helping them think about what all this means in the workforce and where they're going. I believe their expectations are very realistic. However, they have to remember they're going into workforces with people who came up through the workforce and have been in the work environment in very different ways than they have. And I think where it's been a struggle for Gen Z, because the most of them, have spent a good deal of their life remote in school, because of COVID, or, even locked up in their houses to a degree. And an awful lot of them haven't worked in the work world in a way that, you and I grew up in the work world. And the struggle isn't a lack of understanding because we have the leaders, the Gen X, the millennials, some of the boomers, who remember what it was like before, who remember the collaboration. There's some nostalgia for how things worked and wanting to have that back. But the fact is, even if we suddenly 5 days a week had everybody in the office, it's not going to go back to what it was. So to some degree, they need to shift their thinking because just bringing everybody back isn't going to change things to suddenly be the collaboration you wanted before. At the same time, Gen Z needs to ease into it a little bit. So I experienced this myself a couple of years ago. I have a Gen Z daughter, college senior, who had an internship at a nonprofit. And she's a hardworking kid. And she will do anything, especially when she's passionate about it. And she's very passionate about this nonprofit, excited to go in. And as she went in the first hour or so, she sent me pictures of her own office and, all excited about these things, really excited about the job. By the time she came home, her immediate comment was 9 to 5. She's like, 9 to 5. They want me in the office 9 to 5. To her, it was just unfathomable. Like she works best in, these different environments.
Yeah.
And what I advised her, and this is what I advise Gen Z, is just experiment. Go along with it for 2 weeks show them, do what they're asking, show them who you are, show them how you work, show them the value you bring. And I guarantee, knowing the leaders of this organization, I guarantee they aren't going to really care. Yeah. They aren't going to care.
Yeah. Once they establish a level of trust.
Once they establish the trust, they show the ability. And I think this is...
Improve yourself a little.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure you've had through your career employees that have worked for you that bring so much value that in some ways you're willing to bend.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Right? But then there's some that they're bringing enough value, but you're not going to bend because it's not necessarily worth the bending. So if you bring that extra thing, if you do the extra work, I think of it as, more of a sports analogy, which, of course, OSU is perfect.
We love our sports analogies around here.
Absolutely. And if you think about the relationship with the employer and the employee, and think about it as the coach and the player, right? And if you want to be a successful player, if you want to be the star player, if you want to be the best, just giving enough and telling the coach, nah, I'm not going to really do these training programs. I'm going to do my own. If you're an outstanding, gifted player that cannot be, denied, then maybe you're going to be able to stay on the team. Anything short of that, you're going to be let go.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing. In the organization, you're going to get the opportunities based on what you provide, how you perform. And it's really hard to perform without giving it all, without understanding where the coach is coming from and why they want you to do it. And I think having a little bit of that mentality makes it less of a blame game, because one of the biggest challenges we have right now is the leaders, again, often the older generations, they think they're right. And they think these people coming in should just do what I want them to do, and they should behave, and they should do what I did, and blah, blah, blah. We got the younger people.
I think I am guilty of that a little bit. So.
I think we're all guilty a little bit. We got the younger people who think they're right. Neither side's right. Yeah. There's elements, and that's where it needs to get beyond the my way or the highway in both sides, and understand more about why, why they want what they want.
So something I kind of gleaned out you just said was like, for the aspiring young professional, maybe they shouldn't go into an interviewing situation or a job offer situation trying to dictate their work arrangements, like saying, I need to be 100% remote, or I need hybrid. This is like, play along, play the game for a while, and then earn it.
Yeah.
Earn your ability to have some flexibility. That's a big takeaway. So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. About a week or two ago, there was a story in NPR Marketplace talking about the unemployment rate being twice that for the leading part of Gen Z. So let's say maybe those 23 to 28, right? Those are in the working world now. The unemployment rate's twice that of their predecessors, and part of that's just being young, right? Part I think that's somewhat true over time, but this is over-indexing. This is what's going on right now. And kind of associated with that was a bunch of articles that came out. I think the lead article might have been Fortune, but there's a bunch of different articles about it late last year, early this year, about Gen Z getting fired at a higher rate than other previous generations. And there's a stereotype that's starting to be formed out there. Us Gen Xers and some of the millennials are forming a stereotype about their younger counterparts of Gen Z. And I want our listeners to just be aware of this and and avoid some of the pitfalls. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those challenges that are being offered up in a lot of these articles, so they can avoid being stereotyped. So let's take first. One of the top ones was lack of motivation. How would you recommend an aspiring Gen Z professional to demonstrate that they're motivated?
Okay, so this is another every single question's tricky because there's so many sides to it, right? The motivation, how the Gen X and older millennials are assessing motivation is often by how hard you're working, how much time you're putting in, how much effort you're putting in. And I don't think that's necessarily right, because we've had so much of the world that's evolved to where we can use technologies in different ways and we can accomplish things in different ways. I did some research with part of my team. I had them do the research within the firm to understand some things. And one of the things that came back that surprised me was the Gen Z who did this research discovering that the younger people in the firm were putting in as much time as the older people, and believing that this validated the younger people's belief that they weren't appreciated. And as I dug into this more, I'm like, wait a minute. Do you think that younger people shouldn't work as much, or the junior people shouldn't work as much as the senior people? And they're like, yeah. And of course, I go into do you know, back in my day, right? Like, we were always there before the boss and before the client. We never left after. And I've got an amazing group. They very respectfully, one of them asked, she's like, well, were you always working? I'm like, well, no. But, I was there.
Were you always working? In the office?
Were you always productive? Were you always, and she's like, well, when their focus more on the productivity and getting the work done and then having the free time to do other things. I'm like, well, when we got our things done, we asked for more things to do. And when I share this with the leaders who are in the older generations, they're always shocked to hear that younger people think that they shouldn't be working as much. At the same time, when I dig in with my generation and my peers and colleagues and talk about this, they joke about what they used to do in order to appear they were working harder. So the idea of staying in the office till 9 o'clock, and when they left, leaving their door cracked and the light on just in case anybody was there, so it looked like they were still working. Or I remember one colleague who actually set his alarm clock to wake up at 2 a.m. to send the project manager, the person leading it, the presentation at 2 a.m. so it looked like he was working at 2 a.m. Because this is how we assessed value. And when you look at it that way, it really does look ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good point.
So that's where it's not saying that Gen Z and how they view it is completely wrong. However, it's understanding the people who are deciding whether you're going to work for them and whether you're going to get promoted and that sort of thing are looking beyond just what you turn in, and they're expecting more than just the minimal viable product. Right. They're expecting more than that. I think Gen Z's had challenges because of the way that they've grown up in an environment where they didn't have people looking over their shoulder. They didn't have people assessing how hard are you working to get this done. Much of it's been done at home, whether it's schoolwork or work. And they just have not been programmed to think that way. I think that's a positive, but they're going to have to gently work their way into the work world and demonstrate what they can do in less time. And I think it's going to be a real asset in the long run, especially as we have AI and other technologies coming in, when the whole point is to make things more efficient, to get done more with less. They have a huge advantage there.
Yeah.
Huge. But they're going to have to get past the front door and gain the trust of showing the leaders that they really want to do the job, that they really want to do these things, and then demonstrate that there's other ways to do it and that you can do it faster, and that can work to your advantage.
Yeah. So a couple of things you said in there. One, you mentioned about the minimum viable product, and also when I've got my work done, to ask, is there anything else I can
Absolutely.
do? And then also maybe stepping up to maybe step outside your job description. What would be your recommendations to Gen Z for like taking on that extra work? Which could mean maybe it does throw your balance of life off for a little bit, but because there's this old cliche about dressing for the job you want, right? But there's also kind of like acting in producing for the job you want versus the job you have. What recommendations do you have along those lines?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's unique about Gen Z and young people in general today is because of the technology that they've grown up with and have at their fingertips. They have an ability to learn at a rate that is absolutely inconceivable to older generations. Use that to your advantage. So if you're bringing, the boss or your manager or whatever assignment, tell them how you got it done and that you were able to do it, 5 times faster by doing it this way. Say, are there other things I can show you, that I can do, and I'll show you how we can do it a different way. In doing that, you're bringing an incredibly unique value. You're showing initiative beyond what your peers might be showing. You're engendering yourself because you're becoming an asset that is beyond what the expectations might be at this point. So I don't think of it as asking for, just asking for more work, but actually showing what you can do, doing more work, but demonstrating how you can do it differently too, and almost turning it into a game.
Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't feel so much like just pile more on me.
Right.
Instead, it's more of a
Which was
strategic
more like our generation
challenge.
was.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And our generation was, how many more hours can I work? Which doesn't necessarily produce more. So I think focusing on how can you get more done and demonstrating you can do more than they even expect you to do, and showing them how things can be done differently, that can really change how you're perceived and add unique value that is needed in order to stay in the workplace today.
So another component of this was professionalism. That whether it's professionalism, communication, how you interact with your boss or your colleagues, dress. Just talk a little bit about different perceptions of professionalism and what the expectations are out there, and recommendations you would give for Gen Z along those lines.
Yeah. I think this is one where they have to ease into the workplace in different ways too. So just because we do things or there's rules doesn't necessarily mean they're right, but it also doesn't mean you're going to be able to change them overnight. So when I came into the workplace in the 90s and I was with Ernst & Young the first time, we had a manager, this is late 90s, who we had to wear suits to work first off, and who didn't want us wearing pants suits. That said we should wear, dress suits, and you always had to wear pantyhose and everything else. And I remember thinking, okay, on the Today Show, Katie Couric's not wearing pantyhose. I'm like, why do I have to wear pantyhose? So I could see where the trends were going, where things were moving. But if that's the
Our
battle,
listeners are not going to know who Katie Couric was.
You're right. On the Today Show, the morning show. But if that's the battle you're picking, then you're in for a really tough fight. So with that, things do evolve. They do change. And it depends on what kind of industry you're in. I was in a very conservative, type of organization. That is not going to be where the change happened. It happened in other industries, such as entertainment, and then it filtered in. But
to varying degrees based on the culture, though.
Absolutely. But I think with the professionalism is, one, understand what is expected. Understand from a dress code, from a behavior, from these different things, and determine first off why. Why are they wanting to do that? And if you immediately go to, well, it's because they're stodgy, old people, whatever it is, then be like, okay, is there any evidence, against that? Is there any way that that's not true? Is there other reasons that they could be wanting it? Could it be because the client expectations, and you have to meet the client expectations? I think it really comes down to picking your battles. And if the battle's going to be around, well, I should be able to act this way or dress this way or whatever, because this is the way people do it today, and in that environment is something different, you need to accept you're not going to succeed there. Yeah. I think about one of the startups I worked in, which is a retail strategy design firm. And when I started there, I had spent my career up until that point in corporate, mostly retail, which is more of a tough love industry. Yeah. It was, especially back then. I think it was worse. It wasn't always very kind.
And you pretty much had to be type A to survive.
You had to be type A and thick-skinned, and it was a very, very tough industry. But going into a design firm and a smaller organization, it was not so much tough love. It was much kinder and gentler, which is a wonderful thing. But I had to learn, how do you succeed and function in that environment? I couldn't go in as wonderful as I thought I was. If I went in like a bull in a china shop, I was going to be out. I had chosen to go into that environment. I had strategists I hired to work for me who were amazing, smart, brilliant, very type A. Who, I remember one who was really frustrated that the creatives didn't move fast. They didn't get things done as fast. They didn't do these separate things. And the way I explained it to him was, this is a design firm, and we chose to be here. And it is up to us to make it work with the people that we chose to join. And if we can't do that, then we probably should be in a different organization. So it's deciding what you're comfortable with the degree of change, but also recognizing the organization you go into, understand the culture, understand the expectations, understand how they expect you to work. Don't sell yourself as something you're not going to be willing to be. Really understand it and accept when you go in that I am choosing to be here. This is what their expectations are. Yeah. It doesn't mean you can't evolve it with time and evolve changes. But if you go in hard-nosed, you're not going to succeed, and you probably won't be there very long.
So very closely tied to the professional piece is like communication skills. A lot of these articles mentioned some challenges regarding communications. So Gen Z has developed their own methods and their own platforms for communicating, but that doesn't often translate very well to the working world.
Right.
How would you recommend to them to better adapt to the communication expectations of the professional world?
Okay. So the communications is one I'm working with a lot of organizations on, because I'll give Gen Z some credit here again. Like, there's a lot of areas that I think they're right in many, many ways. But again, we got to figure out how to change the world together. Right. And you can't do that by just going in and pushing your way through and making it happen. So if we look at the communications and the ways of communicating, a lot of organizations have. Much of it is very backward, not very clear. Think about how you're communicating to your customers. Think about when was the last time, you got an email or a message that was paragraphs long and you had to try and filter it out or whatever it is. So organizations themselves need to make some changes in these areas and figure out how to more clearly communicate, period, to their customers, to their employees, that sort of thing.
I'm laughing because I think of some of the emails I get from Ohio State that's multiple paragraphs long.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, I don't have time for this right now.
Absolutely. I mean, if you open an email and it says, here's what I'm asking you, here are the bullets, a few bullets, those are the ones you respond to. The ones you open that have paragraphs, you flag it. Maybe you'll get to it later. They could be the most important ones.
And the call to action is in the fourth paragraph.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's maddening.
Absolutely. Or, I think of a friend that does a lot of work in this area around healthcare, and the healthcare forms that are sent to customers, where the customer or the patient, hopefully patient, is just trying to figure out whether they're covered for something, and it's this long, and at the end they still don't know if they're covered. And what her organization is doing is working with these companies, and right from the beginning, it's opening, dear Mr. Smith, good news, you're covered. Then the bullets with the details around it, right? So companies need to make some changes around these things. That said, Gen Z doesn't necessarily have all the answers or the best ways of communicating themselves. So it's not with the short, the clear. Like if you look at any Instagram or message from your kid or text from your kid or whatever, sometimes it can be really hard to understand what they're saying or what they want or whatever it is. So as you're going into the organization, this is what I would challenge them to do, is one, think about how they're communicating, what they're communicating. Is it clear? Is it understandable? Is it concise? Does it help the reader or the person you're sending it to understand what you're looking for from them? Become part of the solution in the organization. So rather than going in and just communicating the way you do, can you help make this shift within the organization? Can you help move them forward? And this is where it needs to be handled with maturity. It can't be, and curiosity about why an organization's doing what they're doing and trying to figure out how you can shift it. But it does take clear communication themselves. And honestly, this is where I think AI can be a real friend. I use it. I use multiple different things because I have a lot of thoughts in my brain by the time they come out on paper and email. I don't know if they make any sense. But that's where you can put it in the systems now and say, help me more clearly communicate this. Or I'm trying to communicate this to my manager who's 45 years old. What's the best way? Like, we can actually use these tools to work to our advantage. They can't come up with the idea for us or the things we want to say, but they can help us figure out better ways to say it. And through that, we learn. I mean, think about, like, I'm a horrible speller. And think about spell check and what that's done for us.
Yeah.
We literally, like when I went into the workforce, if you wanted to spell, you had to look in the dictionary to figure out how to do it. So I think it's the same thing with Gen AI and these tools that can help us in these other ways get more clear, but take it on yourself to figure out how can you do things better and share it back with your managers in the communication area.
So the last couple I want to touch upon that's brought up in some of these articles, possibly two different sides of the same coin, but Gen Z's getting stereotyped as being somewhat entitled and also thin-skinned. Probably to maybe one degree or another, unjustly so, but how does a Gen Z or young Gen Z professional demonstrate that they don't fit that stereotype of being entitled and or being thin-skinned?
I think
and by the way, just for thin-skinned, meaning like you don't take criticism very well. Meaning like you take things personally too quickly and too easily. It's just in case they didn't know what thin-skinned means.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first on the entitled, I think one thing that would help Gen Z is to have a mindset as they go into an organization or they're even interviewing with the organization that you're going to dislike half your job. Like half of what you do, if you like more than half or you love more than half, consider yourself lucky.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's going to be much more than half. Yeah. But I think we've got to shift the mindset a little bit about the idea, especially as you're starting out and you're proving yourself and you're learning and you're developing, of thinking that you're going to walk into an ideal world where everything is perfect and you love every aspect of it. And if you can go in with that mindset, it's going to help your expectations around what should happen and how it should happen and how you should feel about it. And it's going to help you be more receptive to the criticism, the things you need to learn. That's the other thing I think would be really beneficial when we think about criticism, is the person who you see as criticizing you is actually trying to help you improve. So I think the worst thing is a manager or a boss that doesn't tell you what you can do better, that doesn't tell you how you can improve. Again, this comes back to the athlete coach. Yeah. If you have a coach who just says you're wonderful and you don't need to do anything differently, do you really feel like you're getting better? Do you feel like you're going to get stronger? Is there really even any reason to have a coach? I mean, if we think about it from that standpoint, and they're actually there to help you, and then that's what they're sharing, they're developing you, I think it helps us to be a little bit more thick-skinned in what we're hearing back.
Yeah, very good point. So any parting advice for the aspiring Gen Z professional as they're entering the workforce or getting in their first job? What would be like the biggest piece of advice you would offer them?
There's a million things. I think the biggest one, this is something I've really been working on a lot more lately, is how you're going to communicate with that boss, that organization, that manager. And what I'm encouraging organizations to do is to go back to like the employment letter or the employment agreement or the employment blueprint, whatever you want to call it. The biggest thing I think that causes problems in organizations for both the organization and the managers and for the employees or the Gen Z is a lack of understanding, a lack of clarity about what the expectations are. And organizations create a lot of it themselves. I see a lot of organizations, especially in the last few years, this is starting to be less so as the labor market tightens. But many have been so hungry for people. They've done a really great job around marketing and pitching to the employees. And the employees are getting it. No, and you're getting it. It's a false promise, right? Mm-hmm. You're selling something that you're not delivering on. And that does not work for anybody. It doesn't help anyone. And that's where I think we're seeing a lot of the layoffs or cuts or, the Gen Z quitting is because there hasn't been a match between what they expected, what they were sold, and what they're getting when they're getting in. So I'm working with employers on how to be more transparent around that and sharing what it actually is. And maybe you could say it's aspirational. This is what we want to achieve, but here's where we are today. I think same thing. Employees, especially Gen Z, they're because they've grown up on social media and internet and all these things, they're really, really good at creating a brand around themselves and pitching who they are based on what they think the organization wants. And that's where I think we need to create more transparency and actually have this agreement or this blueprint when you go in. Ask your manager, even if they're not initiating it, there's ways you can initiate this yourself and saying, I want to be successful here. I want you to be happy with what I'm doing. Here's some things I want to understand to do that. How do you prefer to be communicated with? Do you prefer email? Do you prefer text? Do you like face-to-face talks? Should I set a call up with you every week? It's understanding those things and conforming to the degree around how things should work. Ask them what kind of hours you expect. Do you expect me here at a certain time? Is there a reason you want me here at a certain time? Do you expect to be able to reach me at all times? Like these things, you have to be careful in how you communicate it. But if you do it as a genuine curiosity and wanting to know and wanting to understand because you want to fulfill expectations, you will then get more of the facts and you can accept, determine whether it's something you can accept and you want to be part of or not. So I think this has to happen much more during the recruiting and the interviewing process. But even once you're on board, having those touch bases, initiating those touch bases with your manager on a regular basis. But again, telling them, I want to do this monthly with you. Just this half hour to understand what's working, what's not working. Where have there been challenges? And then ask them to, over the next week or 2 weeks to take notes and tell you if they see things and give you the feedback. What I see is it's much harder for managers to give feedback than often it is to receive it. And because managers have become fearful of the thin skin and what kind of reaction they're going to get, often they're not giving the feedback and the employee's not learning it until it's too late.
Yeah.
So I think these types of things and taking control, taking initiative, empowering yourself, not with, attitude, but instead with the facts and asking the questions that are going to help you be successful and showing your manager you have a genuine interest in understanding them and who they are and how they want to be treated. I think it helps come back the other way as well.
Marcie, that was great. Very useful, very helpful. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for joining us here at Career EQ. It's been great having you. Stay tuned, listeners, because our next episode, Marcie's coming back, and we're going to field some questions from actual Gen Z students. And check our website page for additional resources. We've got some links in there to some of Marcie's videos and some of the resources she's provided and some other things I think our listeners will find useful.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Marcie.